want to welcome you all here this afternoon today to hear from our great panelists about the real war against women. As the nation's premier organization for conservative women, the Luce Policy Institute seeks to promote leading conservative women and prepare women for leadership. We do this through a series of unique programs and events like this one and help students bring conservative ideas to their campuses. Our campus lecture program includes great conservative women like Bay Buchanan, Michelle Malkin, Essie Cupp, and some others whom you will be hearing from this afternoon. If any of you are interested in bringing a conservative speaker to your campus or learning about other ways to combat the left at your college or university, please call us at 888-891-4288 or visit our website at cblpi.org. Our first panelist, Christina Hoff Sommers, is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Before joining AEI, she was a professor of philosophy at Clare University, where she specialized in moral theory. Sommers is the editor of Vice and Virtue in Everyday Life, a leading college ethics textbook, and is also the author of Who Stole Feminism and the War Against Boys. Her latest book, co-authored with AEI colleague Sally Sattel, is called One Nation Under Therapy. Sommers has appeared on numerous television programs, including 60 Minutes and The Oprah Winfrey Show. She has also made appearances on The Daily Show on Comedy Central. She has lectured and taken part in debates on more than 100 college campuses, and we are very glad she's here to join us today. Our second panelist is Karen Harned, Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Business Small Business Legal Center. Along with 26 states, the NFIB joined the lawsuit at the Supreme Court against the healthcare legislation. Karen has argued passionately on behalf of small business owners and their rights to own and operate business. As an associate at Olson, Frank & Vita, she specialized in food and drug law and represented several small businesses and their trade associations for Congress and federal agencies. She also worked as an assistant press secretary for Senator Don Nichols from Oklahoma. She received her BA from the University of Oklahoma in 1989 and her JD from the George Washington Law School in 1995. Our next speaker, Lala Mooney, is an outspoken activist against the oppression of the Cuban government. Lala and her family were put into prison in 1961, immediately following the Bay of Pigs invasion. The family was able to escape after 2 months, made their way to the United States, and eventually settled in the D.C. area. She now travels to Cuba on a yearly basis to visit her relatives and friends and takes clothing and medicine to the local churches there. She has appeared on BBC and Univision and has also been covered in publications like the Frederick News Post and other Hispanic publications. She has 4 children, one of whom, Alex Mooney, is the chairman of the Maryland Republican Party. She's now retired and divides her time between her 13 grandchildren and her dedication to Cuba. She earned her BS in psychology from Catholic University and a master's in psychology and community counseling from Hood College in Maryland. Our last panelist, who will be joining us shortly, is former U.S. Treasurer and author Bay Buchanan, whose extensive career in policy analysis, campaigns, and her outspoken defense of the right to life makes her one of our most inspirational campus speakers. Bay began her political career as the national treasurer for Ronald Reagan's presidential campaigns in 1980 and 1984. This position catapulted her into a distinguished career when she was appointed the youngest U.S. treasurer in American history in 1981. Until recently, Bay was a political analyst for Inside Politics on CNN. She has also appeared on numerous television programs and talk radio shows. A published author, her most recent book is called Bay and Her Boys, Unexpected Lessons I Learned as a Single Mom. A native of Washington, D.C., Buchanan has a master's degree in mathematics from McGill University in Montreal, Canada, and has further studies at several universities, including the University of New South Wales in Australia. In 1981, she received an honorary doctorate of law from Stanford University. She lives in Virginia and is the proud mother of 3 sons. At this time, I'll invite our panelists each to speak. After the last panelist, we will have a Q&A session with all of them. If you'll just join me in welcoming them now.
Good afternoon. I am Christina Hoff Sommers from the American Enterprise Institute, and it's an honor to be here with the Clare Boothe Luce Institute. It's one of my favorite organizations, and I urge you to join it and support it any way you can. For the past few decades, I have studied the influence of the American feminism on American culture, with a special emphasis on academic culture. Today, I'm going to argue that feminism is dysfunctional. That, in my view, the noble cause of women's emancipation is being damaged by the contemporary women's movement. And in the little time that I have with you, and I'm going to push back a bit for 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes, I will explain why I think it's doing more harm than good. But first, I just want to say a few words about my background. In the early 1990s, I was a feminist academic in good standing. My courses at Clark University were cross-listed with women's studies, my philosophy courses. I was invited to review papers for feminist journals, invited to feminist conferences. All that changed in the mid-90s when I wrote a book called Who Stole Feminism? And the book was strongly feminist, but I rejected the idea that American women were oppressed. For the most part, I said feminism had succeeded. It was a great American success story. By the 90s, American women were among the freest and most liberated in the world. It no longer made sense to speak of women as an oppressed class. And yes, there were still problems, but men had problems too. And for each sex, there was a mix of sort of burdens and benefits. It wasn't easy to say that women were doing worse than men. It was a complicated mix. Well, in the book, I tried to show that the women's movement, that feminism, had been hijacked by gender war eccentrics. And I do mean eccentric. At the time I was writing, some of my colleagues, well, one in particular, one feminist colleague, had changed the name of her seminars to ovulars. She didn't like the word seminar, I suppose because the root word is associated with the very essence of male power. And so she changed it to its feminist equivalent. Don't even think about it. When I read it, I thought, what is that word ovular? That's a new word. And I was going to the dictionary, and I realized she made it up. But I also realized she wasn't kidding. She was serious. When Who Stole Feminism was first published, I received some fan mail from feminist colleagues, not very much. For the most part, the feminist establishment was very unhappy with my book. They did not appreciate my plea for moderation. And I was quickly subjected to a colorful array of insults for my heresies. Many feminist leaders and academics at the time believed that American women were living under patriarchy. They did not appreciate my denial of that oppressive fact. And I was called a backlasher, a traitor to my gender, an anti-woman. On one occasion, they referred to Christina Hoff Sommers and Margaret Thatcher as those two female impersonators. Well, I am not a female impersonator, a backlasher, a traitor. What I am is a philosophy professor, a former, now at the think tank, with a respect for logic, clear thinking, rules of evidence, and I hope I have a strong sense of fairness. And I believe that it is my bias towards logic and reason and fairness that put me at odds with the feminist establishment. I realize that is a harsh assertion, but I'm going to try to back it up. If you have had a feminist speaker at your school, or just go to one of the websites of one of the leading women's organizations, the National Organization for Women, the National Women's Law Center, the American Association of University Women, it's unlikely that you're going to see a celebration of equality feminism, a celebration of anything. For the most part, they are very negative. They have a long litany of factoids about how women are still held down, held back in American society. I consider myself an equity feminist or an equality of opportunity feminist. I want for women what I want for everyone, fair treatment, no discrimination. On the other hand, I can accept the facts that the sexes are different but equal. I don't insist on equality of outcome, I want equality of opportunity. Most of the feminists that are sort of in the mainstream women's organizations are not equality feminists or equity feminists. They are what I call gender feminists. Most of them believe that women are, and this was developed in the 80s, this theory of the sex-gender feminist, the sex-gender system. The idea is that we are, every institution in the society bears the impress of patriarchy. Churches and schools, even language itself has to be liberated from this oppressive system. And one feminist philosopher described it very vividly. She said, the sex-gender system is that system by which, she said, we are all born bisexual and then transformed into male and female gendered human beings, one destined to command, the other to obey. I read that to my husband and he said, no, which one commands, which obeys, but never mind. But that's the sex-gender system. We're all just born kind of gender-neutral human beings, and then the system, social conditioning, turns some into little boys and some into little girls. They give them boys trucks and dress them in blue, and they create gender, which is imposed from outside. Now, I just reject this view. I don't argue that gender is entirely, of course there are cultural influences. It's probably, obviously, a complicated mix of biology and environment. But to say that on some campuses to gender feminists is to commit an act of, as I said, of heresy. Now, I hasten to add, there are some serious scholars in women's studies. Most departments include their fair share of non-ideological academics who just offer straightforward courses, sometimes wonderful courses in women's psychology, women's history, women in literature. But ideologically fervent, statistically challenged hardliners set the tone in most women's studies departments. Yeah, all that I've ever seen. And if there's a department that defies this stereotype, let me know. I would love to meet them. And then, by the way, conservative women, moderate women, libertarian women, traditionally religious women, left out, not at the table. It's just an unwritten rule. Only women from the radical left have the right to interpret the lives of women. So we have a whole body of scholarship developed by women from a very, very narrow range of views and opinions and so forth. On many campuses, young women are taught that they live in a patriarchal oppressive society where girls are shortchanged in school, robbed of their self-esteem in adolescence, and then channeled into low-paying fields. Once in the workplace, they're cheated out of 25% of their salary. They face invisible barriers and all sorts of forces that hold them down and keep them back, keep them out of the high echelons of power. Now, this picture just doesn't fit reality. It's distorted. But the false claims that support it have been repeated so many times they've been taken on this aura of truth. I was at many times I'll be lecturing on a campus and some young women come who have had one too many courses in women's studies, and it's as though they have, deeply drunk the Kool-Aid. They are generally intelligent, sensitive, socially concerned young women, but they have come to take on this grim feminist worldview as absolute truth. And most of them seem to be unaware that there could be reasoned, empirically based arguments contrary to what they've been taught in their classes. I recall speaking at Haverford College, and there were, while I was talking, there were a whole group of young women knitting nervously as I spoke, and someone told me, oh, those are Wiccans from Bryn Mawr. And I don't know if they were protesting, they would just like to knit. And I don't mind Wiccans. My best friend in high school turned out to be a famous Wiccan. Her name, when I knew her, her name was Mimi Simos, but she changed it to Starhawk. Has anyone heard of Starhawk? Oh, she's a leading Wiccan. I don't want her to cast any spells, negative spells, good spells. She says she only casts good spells. But anyway, in this there was a hectic discussion with the Wiccans and the feminists and so forth afterwards, and one woman defended her major at Bryn Mawr, and she said, "It taught me to love my body." And just as a philosophy professor, I suggested that was a rather weird goal for a college class. I mean, it's nice to love your body, I guess, but what was the point of that class? Anyway, she was mystified. Another young woman was appalled that I had suggested that the free market had helped women, that the free market had actually created the conditions that made feminism and women's emancipation possible. Well, this one young lady was just horrified. How can you say that capitalism has helped anyone? And I was amused that afterwards, I thought, well, maybe they at least enjoyed having a lively debate. Well, I found out that afterwards, they went to the young woman who had invited me and said that she had provided a forum for hate speech. So that's philosophical debate at Haverford. Maybe it's not that way anymore. This was a few years back. But over the years, I have looked carefully at feminist, standard feminist claims, statistics on, well, just choose any subject you like. Eating disorders, violence against women, pay equity, education. What I have found is that in most cases, not all, but in most cases, these statistics are wildly distorted, egregiously, horrifically wrong. I don't have the time to go through the long and sorry and twisted tale of feminist misinformation. But anything you read in a feminist textbook, I hate to have to say this, but take it with a grain of salt. Women, and here's the thing, just as I think that young women are harmed if they take too many of these courses and become bitter and angry at the world because they're oppressed, that's ridiculous to take young women and change them in this way. This cannot be a legitimate goal of a college course. But there are these gender feminists, many from the 70s and 80s, who are still very bitter and eager to transfer that mind to their students. And I think that's wrong. And I also think it's very bad to disseminate so much false information. I'll just give you an example of false information. There's so much of it. This one I just saw today. There's a Professor Jessie Klein who's written a book about bullying in schools, and she writes it from a sort of hardline feminist perspective. And she had a number of statistics, and I recognize them almost all of them as just standard distortions. But in one of them she said, dating violence is another step on an escalating continuum of behaviors by which boys, schooled in traditional masculinity, demonstrate their power over girls. So I looked at the rates of dating violence, and she was writing a book about high school. I went to the CDC, their 2009 study of youth risk behavior, grades 9 through 12. And what I found was distressing, but it said 9% of girls and 10% of boys report being hit, slapped, or physically attacked by their boyfriend or girlfriend. So it is a problem, but it's not the problem she described. But by reporting it that way in her book, she gives people, first of all, it's denigrating to men. Some of these statistics I've called hate statistics because they create kind of bigotry or misandry. I became a feminist in the 70s because I did not like misogyny. I still do not. And I know there are troglodytes out there, and I don't tolerate them and can't stand them. But on the other hand, there are now female troglodytes who are just as full of prejudice. And the word is misandry, so we need both words, misogyny and misandry. And so the misinformation is everywhere, and it's routinely passed along to unsuspecting young women, and it embitters them, and it leads to policies. But I do want to take on probably the most durable false statistic in the American policy debate, and just to show how poorly served we are by the feminist establishment. They are in love with the statistic. They will never let it go. And it is a claim that women are cheated out of, women are paid 23 cents for every dollar a man is paid for the same job. The 23-cent gender pay gap is, what is that figure? It's true. There is it depends how you calculate it, but roughly 23 cents. It's simply the difference. If you look at the wages of all men in the United States working full-time and all women, and you do the average, it turns out there's a 23-cent gap. And you've got Nancy Pelosi and vast numbers of leaders of our women's group just up in arms. They're not going to stand it. They tried to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. They're going to put an end to it. This will not stand. Well, the problem is that when any half-competent economist looks at the pay gap, they immediately see that you have to take into account that men and women are somewhat different. And women have a slightly different relationship with the workforce. And, for example, women may have different majors in college. They enter different fields. They work different numbers of hours per week. And they work different hours per week. And in 2012, this was last week in the New York Times. It was about doctors, and this is a quote. It said, "Female doctors are more likely to be pediatricians than cardiologists. They are more likely to work part-time. And even working part-time, even those who work full-time work 7% fewer hours per week. They are much more likely to take extended leaves." Anyway, there's a very big difference between women and men, but you will have a feminist group like women doctors are paid considerably less than male doctors for the same work. They don't do the controls. I don't see how women are well served by hyperbole, exaggeration, misinformation. Sorry for the pun. I'm just going to end by mentioning a game that I think captures maybe everything that's gone wrong with feminism in the last 20 years. It's called Gender Bias Bingo, and it's actually sort of fun. We're going to play it later. With the help of a large government grant from the National Science Foundation, this activist feminist lawyer, Joan Williams, and her team at Hastings School of Law developed a website called the Gender Bias Learning Project. And the centerpiece is this bingo game. And to win, a female scholar is supposed to submit harrowing tales about how some, usually male, colleague mistreated her or stereotyped her or misperceived her in some way, some injustice narrative. The site includes animated videos demonstrating bias, and in one episode there's these 3 obnoxious male scientists who are sitting together sort of conspiring about their obviously superior female colleagues, and they refer to these females as harpies, hotties, who we can't say all these words, feminazis. According to Professor Williams, she says, our site is fun and funky, and it's based on science. Well, in fact, it's based on 1970s ideology, trumped up by statistics and a tendentious set of readings. And then she says, and this is on the animated video, she says, it's better to be a bitch than a doormat. Well, who wants to be either? And why did Professor Williams and her like-minded colleague, how did they manage to run off with feminism? So my message today is to take back feminism. Reform it, correct the excesses, insist that moderate and conservative women be given a voice, and then set about writing the next great chapter in the history of women's quest for freedom. This section of the Avila art is over. Thank you.